rahmatullah. Peace and blessings. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of the Beneficent, the Merciful, Lord of the Worlds. Welcome to the BlaXSheep PCR podcast. So PCR standing for politics, culture, religion, where we're going to try and mash up those subjects, have off-the-cuff conversations, pretty raw, pretty unedited. And you would have heard a little tune at the beginning. I'll put the full songs at the end at producing, kind of sampling those tunes. And if you're interested in any of them for any reason, drop me an email. So I want to start off the first podcast like I said, it's going to be raw and uncut, no face podcast, trying to get away from this manicured world. So first thing I want to talk about, if you haven't noticed already, that I'm a Muslim, I'm an Englishman, and obviously there'll be a lot of debate about that in certain circles, but we'll get to all that hopefully over the different podcasts and the different topics we'll discuss over time. But really, I wanted to kind of set the tone by talking about what is Islam, what are Muslims, and how does those three elements of the political, the cultural, and the religious world reflect when it comes to Islam. So what is Islam? Islam is a monotheistic faith that comes from the chain of prophets that God has sent to man. And we believe that Judaism, Christianity, and most other religions, God sent thousands of prophets, that they all came with the same message, which is essentially to worship the one creator and to live by actions and not necessarily by words. So essentially your actions are what are important, and your purpose is to know the self so that you can know God, and then give God his rights, which is to be worshipped, to be acknowledged, to be adored, to be loved, and for individuals to put that vessel of faith and belief into that creator. The second purpose is to refine your character, and that is done through this consciousness of God, so that once you're conscious of God, you'll obviously behave and act very differently, because now your creator is watching you. Now you know that every action has a reaction, and that when you die, God will bring you to account for the things that you did, for the life that he gave you, and for the choices that you made. And so that's really kind of the purpose of a Muslim. And we come from the chain of all the prophets. So all the prophets that you see in the Judeo-Christian kind of faith and in the Bible, the Muslims believe in all of them, up to Jesus and beyond, up to the final seal of the prophets, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And we have obviously the similarity that we believe in Christ, as do the Christians, and we believe in Jesus, peace and blessings be upon him, in his virgin birth. We believe that he's coming back. We believe that he was a Messiah of God. The Jews obviously believe all the way up to and stop at Jesus, because they don't believe that he was the Messiah. And I think where we differ obviously with the Jews is that we go all the way to Muhammad, and we believe in Jesus, peace and blessings upon both of them. And with the Christians, it's fundamentally that we're a monotheistic faith. We don't believe in the Trinity. We don't believe in the Father, Son, Trinity kind of complex. And we believe in just pure monotheism, that salvation is through God and God alone. It's not necessarily through your actions. You do good deeds and have good actions because, that's what is best, and God loves what is good, and what is pure and what is, beneficial to the masses. And righteousness. So essentially that's really the kind of the purpose. And there's lots of intricacies and things within Islam that obviously people want to question and get into, and you can drop comments and ask questions, and if I get time, obviously I'll come back to them, and maybe even make some of them topics of discussion for later times. But like I said, I want to keep these kind of short, snappy. It's a no-face podcast. It's unedited. It's raw. So you'll hear background noise, the voice will go up and down and all that kind of good stuff. And to be honest, I don't care, because I don't have time, right? So I'm just trying to get some thoughts out, throw my 2 pence into the digital stratosphere, as it were, and hopefully give people something to think about. So that's kind of the Muslim faith in a nutshell. right? And obviously, there's idiots everywhere. Like, when people ask me, oh, your religion sounds so amazing, like what kind of book or whatever could I read? And obviously, you recommend the Quran, you recommend some other books, Vision of Islam by William Chick, or whatever it might be. You'll recommend some books, but another recommendation that I give people is just don't look at Muslims, right? So go understand the faith, understand it in its kind of purity, stand alone from followers, because human beings are human beings. Like, human beings at the end of the day corrupt things. That's just unfortunately our nature, and especially in these times where it's an age of fear and an age of materialism, which is very it's like the antithesis of the Islamic way. The Islamic way has nothing to do with anything but getting to God. And it has a deeply mystical element to it. And that's why, you'll a lot of New Agers, like us, like pretty much every New Age circle that I've ever been to, there'll be a quote of Rumi or Hafiz or some other Sufi that I've never even heard of. And I'm relatively well read on Islam and Sufism and other parts of, the Islamic faith, but also other faiths. But, you'll go to New Age circles and you'll see a lot of stuff about Sufis and Sufi poetry and blah, blah, blah. But alongside the mysticism and all that quote unquote feel good stuff and all that quote unquote transcendent spiritual kind of wanting and experience, with Islam, there's a whole Sharia, there's like a religious law, and obviously that word is a scary word in today's time, just like jihad is a scary word. And just on a side note, jihad takes two forms in Islam. The small jihad, which is to fight physically in the name of God for a just cause. And there's the greater jihad, which is the fighting of the ego self, the lower self, and fighting desires and negative thoughts and bad opinions, backbiting, blah, 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 right? Now, the thing is with religious law is that obviously, it pertains to various things, but in the most part, it's things like, okay, I need to have ritual purity to approach God. So I've got to do like an ablution and then I can pray, or I could recite the Quran, or I could go into deep meditation because I'm trying to connect with God. And God being the purest of all things, like you're not, it's disrespectful basically to turn up with, crap stains in your drawers and like being, having done a shift at the pit or whatever, and you got dust all over yourself, blah, blah, blah. And so the religious law aspect, has many different levels to it, including like having to pray 5 times a day, having to fast for the month during Ramadan, having to go and perform a pilgrimage, having to give parts of your wealth away to charity, like forcefully, like it's incumbent upon you. Like, you can't be a Muslim unless you do that, right? And then additional charity is highly encouraged and all those other things. Now, people will be like, oh, well, why does God force you to do these things, quote unquote? Well, because human nature is, if God says, oh, you can, or if you want to, go for it. Eventually, when nobody's doing anything, like you end up, unfortunately, like the Christians or like the New Agers, where it's kind of do it when you want, like, have a great practice of meditation for 5 years and change yourself, but then become a complete and, arse bandit of a person thereafter, because you lost that practice, you went through some tribulation, you kind of lost your path, as it were, right? Whereas with Muslims in Islam, you commit to this never-ending lifetime of devotion, whether you like it or not, whether you're in the mood or not. And there are, obviously various different rules that allow you to, okay, you're sick or you're traveling or whatever, and you get to kind of do a different shortened version of prayer or whatever it might be, or you might not have to pray depending upon your circumstance. But let's say, you had a terrible accident, you're in a coma for like 6 months, you can't pray. Once you come out of that coma and you're fine, you got to make up those 6 months of prayer. People are like, oh, well, that's a bit harsh, No, but the person that truly loves God and has this connection will want to. That's why, like, for example, when you see, kids or, adults in Gaza, like, going through the most horrendous thing, but then they come out of the rubble and they're like, oh, what time is it? I need to pray. Because that's our connection with God. And God has told us that the prayer is the highest form of worship. And, if you believe in a creator, then you have to accept that that creator knows you better than you know yourself, right? I mean, that's just obvious. Like, if someone who builds a car, they know how that car works better than the guy who bought the car. And even if the guy who bought the car has had the car for 20 years, 30 years, his entire life, the guy that built the car will still know the car better than that guy, right? Because that's just the way it is. Like, someone who makes something or puts effort into putting something together will always know the intricacies of it and the detail of it better than anybody else. And that's the same with us. And now you're talking about, the all-knowing, the all-wise, the creator beyond time and space, eternal, etc. So all these things you have to kind of give up and say, okay, well, I submit. I mean, that's what Islam is to submit to the will of God. In the New Age, we probably translate that as, oh, let go, let it all go, let go, just trust the universe, etc. Right? Well, in Islam, we just say trust God, like, let go, submit your will to God. Anything great's happening in your life, know that it came from God. Anything, quote unquote, terrible happening in your life, know that it came from God. And, the mystical masters of the Islamic faith will say, well, as quoted by the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, that all things are good for the believer. Like, if he's blessed with something, he's happy, he gives thanks. If he's going through a tribulation, he just has patience. And in both of those situations, whether he's giving thanks for something he's received or he's being patient in a tribulation, well, God is rewarding him and God is pleased with him. So his situation is always good, right? And so, that's pretty much like, well, I guess we'll kind of round it up there for the Muslim faith and move on to, like, what's the culturally, what is the take on Muslims, right? So I would, kind of hazard to guess that most people who have got an issue with Muslims, in the West in particular, or outside of the West, like countries like Iran or Turkey, where you have these, these kind of like were Muslims, not Muslims anymore, families, right? That a lot of their ideas about Islam are not organic or genuine, because most of them are completely ignorant of the Muslims. They're completely ignorant of Islam as a whole, and they've never really met those kind of top G Muslims. And I'm not talking about top G as in Andrew Tate, but I'm just using that kind of reference as a top G, like a really, a real, like, on the level Muslim, a guy who's done a lot of spiritual work, who practices deeply, who has a profound love of God. A lot of the New Agers quote as Rumi and Hafiz and Ghazali and blah, 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 all these great personalities in the faith. And unless you've really met someone like that, or you've studied the religion deeply, you can't really, like, hate in actuality, right? Because the hate is really just coming from your cultural upbringing. And if we take the West as the best example, because the West, for the best part of 1,000 years, there's been this war against Islam, right? And my take would be that, like, through what I've studied, is that Christianity was used as a vessel to kind of create this narrative that it's like Christian versus Muslim, and to create this like this ongoing war that's been going on since 1,000 years. But in reality, who's behind that vessel and the creation of that vessel is the army of Satan. And the army of Satan know, just as the jinn know, who are like, you could translate that roughly as demons in English. In the Quran, God says that a group of jinn heard the Quran and some of them converted immediately. Like, we believe that, jinn, like man, has free will, so he can do good or he could do bad, right? And, just like our kind of nature and tendency is to be forgetful and to be quote unquote sinful, the jinn's natural disposition is to be like a little bit mischievous, right? But that doesn't say that they don't have like the greatest believers, just like in the human world. Like we have great believers. And so I believe that, when Islam came into the fore of the world, the devil knew that, this is endgame. Like, this is like, God has presented human beings with a system and with a way now that is complete and that can give them mass salvation. Because if you believe in God and the devil, like the story is, pretty simple. The devil hates human beings. He loved God. He was kicked out of the heavens because of human beings. And then he's got like a personal vendetta now that I've got to take these humans down. Like I've got to take everybody with me, right? And so, through these different vessels of, using Christianity and now they don't even need Christianity. They just have a general kind of like the West against Islam kind of idea and mentality that's permeated the culture and permeated into every aspect of Western ideology. And my take is simply because Islam holds the keys and the answers to the issues and the problems, not just of society, if followed correctly, but mainly for the human soul. And that is more valuable than anything. The human soul is priceless, and because it's eternal and it's of God in that sense. And so, this war has been going on forever, and if you read enough, you can see the Orientalists and their way of approach to talking about Muslims. You'll have books written about, for example, Imam Shamil, who was a Dagestani warrior, who, is kind of the guy who's birthed this legacy of these Chechen and Dagestani kind of MMA fighters and guerrilla warfare warriors. And, you'll have people write about him and talk about how, hospitable he was and how amazing he was with the children, and then literally the next sentence will be about some crazy barbaric thing where he chopped the head off some guy who looked at him the wrong way. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, this kind of doesn't make sense. And a lot of the times, it's this mechanism to kind of, you say something truthful and good, and then you taint it with something that's maybe exaggerated and just sounds horrific, because you need to continuously perpetuate this idea that Muslims are this thing, barbaric, backwards, unable to merge into society. And the reality is, like, let's be honest, like, Islam is not compatible with the West in this model. Any real Muslim who's like, just honest, like, we're not compatible with the way the West is today. Like, we're not compatible with completely open degeneracy, whether that's like outward shows of homosexuality, pornography, gambling, drugs. That's not, you won't see that in a pure Islamic society. Like, you go back to like Islamic Spain, you're not seeing that. You go to most Muslim countries today, unfortunately the arm of globalism and the internet has hit everybody. So you might find people who are watching pornography, and you might even find that a lot of Muslim countries have some of the highest rates of consumption when it comes to pornography, because it's such an evil that, like, it's like the kid who's never had a chocolate bar his entire life, and then at 30 you give him like unlimited amount of chocolate. He might just go a bit overboard. Obviously in the West, it's like, this has been going on forever. Like, the social norms of like dating and premarital sex and all that kind of stuff were destroyed in like the 60s. And even beyond that, like, you know, discussions of like deviancy and a break from quote unquote the norm or tradition has been like slowly, secretly whispered into the realms of society. And then obviously these same children of the devil, these same evil people, have pushed these ideas, you know, through the university systems and through all these other kind of institutes of intellectualism into the minds of people and marketed them, really, because there were suckers for marketing, is marketed the ideas that degeneracy is a sign of progress. That when you can reach a point where a human being thinks that they're a girl but they were born a boy, or they're a boy born a boy and think they're a girl, or whichever way around, you know, whatever, that's now the peak of like human achievement, that we allow this stuff to happen. And yet at the same time we are so deceitful that we don't tell people that, look, you know, like, if you want to be a girl and you're a boy and we're going to chop you up, that there's like lifetime considerations. Like, you are going to now have a lifetime of being in and out of hospital, infections, operations, ongoing for the rest of your life. And the likelihood is that you're going to exacerbate all those mental and spiritual challenges and all that wrestling you've been doing your whole life, feeling out of place. It's just going to exacerbate them, and it's most likely going to get worse. And that's what most of the research will tell you, that yes, maybe for a moment, for a small fraction of people, does it not then go on to be the most devastating decision they've ever made. But for a moment, right at the beginning, they've achieved this thing where they've had a mastectomy, or they've, you know, chopped their penis off, or whatever it might be, and they feel like, oh, I'm now my quote unquote true self. But then over time, the majority of them, from what I've read, end up having regrets because of the stuff that comes with it. And nobody talks about that. You know, we talk about just, you can flip-flop from this to that. No one talks about the impacts of the reality of when you go down that route. And so, you know, Islam is not culturally in the West compatible with what's going on. There is no compulsion in religion. Like Islam and the Quran, God, the word of God, which is the Quran, says that there's no compulsion in religion. Why? Because God says that this day we've established the truth, and that truth is clear from falsehood, that it cannot be like mixed up, like, you know what's true and you know what's not. There's no mix up. So now you have the choice. Do what you want. Follow the path of God, or follow the other path, which, you know, is the path of the devil. The party of God or the party of the devil, and be okay with it. Obviously, your God programming, your what we call fitra, your natural spiritual disposition, is programmed to believe in God. So when you go against that, you are agitated. That's why, you know, my personal take is that a lot of people might not realize it, but a lot of the agitation that you see amongst quote unquote woke people, or people who are super pro, like, you know, any cause basically, is because the vessel of belief that should be filled with God, worship, and spiritual progression has been substituted for a material, worldly thing, whether that's abortion, or Donald Trump right wing versus left wing, or Democrat or liberal, or, you know, LGBTQ, or whatever it is. Like, once you fill that vessel with this other thing, and you see it even with religious people, like people who are like fundamentalist Muslims and blah blah, I just think it's all degrees of the same thing, like degrees of fear, like where people haven't really come to terms with their mortality and the fact that we are going to die, or the trauma that they might have experienced as children, and we haven't reconciled any of that, and we don't want to face it. Because anyone who's been through any kind of major trial or tribulation in life, you know, you either face it and you go through the fire, or you try to skirt around the fire, and you're still getting burnt like all the time, and the fire's just getting bigger, and eventually it's going to consume you, and then you're going to have a bigger mountain to climb over, and the likelihood is you're probably not going to make it. So, you know, cognizant of time, and I want to try and keep these under 30 minutes because I don't know how long people can be bothered to listen to some random guy freestyling. So then, you know, we come to politically, and politically, obviously, like the Muslims, they hold mass numbers. They have a lot of, you know, material wealth in their countries. And they sit on a lot of minerals and gas and oil and all this other stuff that, you know, the West and the evil ones have always been interested in. You know, like I think the West as a hegemony is not just quote unquote the West as in America, Europe. It's now extended to anyone who basically thinks the same, right? And you could say that about the leader of Saudi Arabia today. You know, he's in cohorts, he's in the same mentality, he's part of the same, you know, groups, Bilderberg or whoever, you know, WEF, like any of these like unelected global organizations that essentially dictate to everybody like how things are going to be, or who are pushing an agenda, you know. And my feeling is, like I've said, is that you're either the party of God or you're the party of the devil, and whichever party you belong to, you're going to promote your party. You're like a, you know, a rave promoter. You're going to promote your party and your ideas. And, you know, that's where we are. I think, you know, Islam is deeply misunderstood as a religion. I think it, you know, holds the answers to a lot of societal issues and problems. It doesn't consign or judge or confine or whatever, you know, word you want to use, people who choose other ways of life. For example, like you can be gay and still be a Muslim, right? Like, so let's say you're practicing praying 5 times a day, you know, you're fasting during Ramadan, blah, 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 but you have this this challenge that you're gay, which falls outside of the religion. So you'd be a major sinner, which God could forgive you for, if you, and only God knows, but there's certain parameters, like you can't be outwardly, you know, running around in your underpants, like in front of kids, having sexually suggestive movements and carrying dildos and all the rest of it, and making it publicly known that this is what you're up to. That's definitely a no-no. But if you're like behind closed doors and you struggle and you ask God for forgiveness, and it's like anything, it's like a guy who is addicted to pornography. Like, it's not that there are sins and there are good deeds, and it's as simple as that. There are sins that are worse than other sins, 100%. Just like there are good deeds that are better than other good deeds. Like, you know, helping a grandma cross the road with her shopping is a great deed. But flying across the world and being a medic and helping children who are having, you know, body parts blown off them is probably better, right? And that's just something that I think we've lost in this society. You know, like a great thinker of today's time in the Muslim world said, is that unfortunately we've reached an age where, you know, the guy who basically spent his whole life in philanthropy and volunteering and giving charity, his life is just as good as a guy who spent his entire life going to, you know, Star Wars conferences dressed as a stormtrooper. Because we're not allowed to judge, quote unquote, you know, and no one's judging, really. It's just an obvious observation that someone's life could be more valuable or have been used in a better way than another person's. So, you know, in a nutshell, I would say, you know, Islam is a very misunderstood religion because of, you know, various reasons, especially the mass marketing that has gone on over the years to give Islam a very bad name and a very bad image. And I will end on this to all my conspiracy theory brothers and sisters out there, right? Because I'm with you on the theories, which I call facts. But anyway, we can list out a few as we go through these podcasts. But the one conspiracy theory that nobody really looks at, nobody mentions, nobody talks about is why? Why this war on Islam? Like, Christianity is over. Like, they already destroyed that. That's gone. Bye. See you later. Right? So now you got to look and say, okay, why are they trying to destroy Islam? Like, okay, if you say, oh, they destroyed Christianity because it's the true way to God, well, then why are they destroying Islam? Why are they not attacking Hinduism or Buddhism or shamanism or Judaism on this level in the public sphere? Right? Jews, most of the hate that Jews get in the public sphere is because they somehow end up in most of the high, powerful positions in banking and finance and music and movies and, the internet, like everywhere, and so, the thing that's going on in Israel and Palestine, obviously, so that, it's like kind of like, it's a different vibe, right? The Christians have just been buried, and now you've only got one other most monotheistic faith kind of left that's practicing openly. Because don't forget, like, the Orthodox Jews, the ones who are practicing the faith, because most modern day Jews don't practice their faith. They're just kind of Jewish by culture or by what they would say ethnicity, even though, like, Jew is not an ethnicity. It's not, it's a religion at the end of the day. And so, because you have Ethiopian Jews and Yemeni Jews and Iraqi Jews and Iranian Jews and, right? And Ashkenazis, right? So, you've got like the Orthodox Jews who are persecuted within their own quote unquote community of Jews. And, you can go research the stories about Iraqi Jews and Yemeni Jews and Ethiopian Jews who were invited to Israel and how they were treated and how they didn't want to leave their own countries and how Israel used terrorist tactics to get them to leave their countries and to come to Israel, where they had less of a life than they did when they were in their home countries. And and that's some more for another time. So we're going to end it here. Bismillah wa billah, in the name of God. There's only one God. And we'll see you next time. Enjoy the tunes. Peace.